by major market is just has declined year over year in all the markets. This is the EU, UK, and US. And like I said, this is not as much a market phenomenon as it is a production phenomenon. Now let's look at export prices of the Brunswick shrimp to the US. Excuse me just one second, I have to close this door here. Thank you. So the export price of shrimp, you can see, again, we're seeing a gradual increase over time. And as I said before, I suspect that there might be a slight change in the size mixture coming to the US. This also shows the volumes, and you can see that in 2022, the volumes were considerably less than the prior year. Although for January, we're certainly up a little, compared to the other months. I don't know why we had such a big import spike in January. In the US, as I was saying about the price spreads, pricing by size has narrowed into 2022-23 compared to what it was in the years prior. Although now it's increasing a little bit because the larger sizes are showing a slightly more weakness than the smallest size shrimp. The 125, 175, of course, is on top here, and 250, 350 is on the bottom. Whoops, let's go back here. Okay. Now, one of the things that is really important to remember about Pandalis is that in the US market, there's almost no connection between warm water shrimp price and Pandalis pricing. And you can see it very obviously on this chart because this purple line is value added like cooked shrimp. And you can see it's a cyclical price. It goes up, down, up, etc. And if you look at Pandalis pricing, it's almost the opposite. It has no relationship between what's going on in the warm water market. So at the time when the warm water market was collapsing, Pandalis prices were very high. Again, warm water market is weakening, Pandalis prices are strong. But what's happened this spring is for the first time, you're seeing both of these products, both the warm water shrimp and the Pandalis shrimp, weakening in price at the same time. I don't know if that's a trend that's going to be sort of continuing, but what I suspect is that the same market forces that are acting to weaken shrimp consumption or weaken shrimp prices overall in the US are also spilling over into the cold water market right now. So for whatever reason, I think that in 2023, the forces that account for shrimp demand, like how eager customers are to buy shrimp and whether they're willing to accept a higher price or insist on a lower price, those forces seem to be acting simultaneously in both of our both markets. And this is not something that has really happened before. If we step back to just look at overall markets, the US market is slightly weakening along with the entire shrimp market in the US. The other markets in Europe are stable, but in terms of Canadian dollar pricing, US market still has the highest return. And again, I don't know if that is a quirk in the US customers or if it's a reflection of the size mix that's going into the US. This is just an expansion of the slide I just showed. I wanted to include other exports as well. So we can see here the relationship in most of the markets remained the same, although the European Union volume declined much more than the UK volume declined, and the US volume declined in percentage terms even less than the UK and European volume. And shipments to other areas, cooked and peeled, declined quite significantly, not quite 50%. So that's a reflection of our lowered production. I want to talk about shell-on exports because the offshore shrimp is such a big component of Canadian production. And in certain types of markets, some of that shrimp goes into industrial shrimp, which is used for double frozen cooked and peeled shrimp. Right now, the shell-on market is very, very strong. And the reason it's strong is China is the primary buyer. And in 2022, when lobster prices were high, there really seemed to be a expansion of Coldwater shrimp sales in China. I don't know if it was related to the pandemic, if it was related to online distribution, but there was a dramatic increase in the volume of Canadian offshore shrimp that was being sold into China in 2022. And you can see that reflected on the slide here because, shell-on cooked shrimp is sold into Europe as well, but the volumes declined significantly, whereas what was sold into China rose substantially. I wanted just to break down the shell-on exports to show China's percentage, which is very large, 2/3. But on the other shrimp that's not going to China, some of this is going into a hand-peeled market. That hand-peeled shrimp is a high-value, high-quality cooked and peeled shrimp because it's cooked in the shell, then hand-peeled. In places like Morocco, this isn't consumption. This is production of hand-peeled shrimp. Albania, production of hand-peeled shrimp. Bulgaria, I'm pretty sure that's peeling operations there. Thailand is likely to have some peeling operations as well. So by my calculations, once you get away from China, about 20% of that shell-on shrimp is going into hand peeling. And the hand-peeled shrimp is a very significant factor in the market in Europe. Let's go to the next. This is cooked and peeled exports to Europe. Of course, the UK represents, one of these is, this is just Europe, cooked and peeled from Canada. So the UK by volume represents about 75%. If you include the US, if you look at a global perspective, the UK by volume is about 50%. And the US is about 1/3. Okay, but in terms of provincial shipments or provincial production in Atlantic Canada, we've discussed this before. The factories in the different provinces are really oriented towards different groups of customers. And in Newfoundland, for example, ships very little shrimp to the US, and by and large, most of their shrimp goes into the UK. And because they're large factories and they generally have higher volumes, they're really accounting for significant volume going into the UK. But in New Brunswick and Quebec, we're really looking at plants that sell more into the US than elsewhere. And this is the volume of New Brunswick to the US, Quebec, which was about the same, and Newfoundland and Labrador, it's about the same. I don't really have an explanation as to why Quebec's U.S. exports remained the same year over year while New Brunswick's declined. Possibly New Brunswick found another market or a more attractive market to sell into. Next here. Let's talk now about the U.S. Shrimp market and the sort of overall situation that we're in. U.S. overall shrimp imports declined in 2022 for the first time in 10 years. There's been a continuously increased demand for shrimp in the U.S., really spiked in 2021. And in 2022 is the first year it's declined since EMS, since 2012. If we want to break down retail versus food service channels, this is data from Urner Barry, but it's dated. This is the last year is 2020. In that year, the pandemic year, there was a big expansion of retail sales from 32 to 40%, and a big contraction in food service. What's happened since then in 2021 and 2022 is the food service share has recovered to some extent. And so I think we're, I think that we're actually much closer to something back that we saw in 2019, when the food service channel for shrimp is going to be 60 to 65%, and the retail channel would be 30 to 35%. Now, this is, of course, all shrimp, not just Coldwater shrimp. The inventory in 2022 has gotten quite large, and that's really causing a drag on the shrimp market. So you can see these are data on shrimp sales at retail, includes all stores, including the Costco's and the club stores, et cetera. And the data is broken out into regular volume, which is non-discounted or non-sale volume. This is by week. You can see there's been a steady decline in sales of shrimp at regular pricing. This is the discounted volume, and you can see that that's been declining as well, but not as much. But what's happened in the last few months is that the retailers have been forced to discount shrimp much more in order to keep selling, and so that's an evidence of weakness on the retail side. Their volumes are falling, they're lowering their prices, and they haven't reached an equilibrium yet where their sales have stopped declining. Sorry, let's go back here. When we look at pricing, we see the same thing. The average shrimp price at retail in the U.S., and this is $7 and $8. I forgot to divide. I forgot what I was dividing here, but anyway, you can see the trend. Shrimp prices are clearly weakening as they're being discounted, and the regular shrimp price is weakening as well. And this is again example of the fact that shrimp is not selling as well in the U.S. as it had in prior years. Sorry, this is giving me a lot of trouble today. One of the things that's happened in 2022 is that the pattern of shrimp buying and seafood as well has returned to a more normal pattern. And typically, if you look at all seafood, shrimp and fish together, there's a peak sales season in Lent, which is of course right now. Then sales are kind of below average through the summer and into the fall. Then there's a big peak again around the holidays, December and January. And this got very disrupted during the pandemic, so that so that volumes in the spring just spiked up in these levels here. But for 2022 and again for 2023, we're seeing a return to a sort of normal buying pattern for seafood, including shrimp. Now, the U.S. has a inventory problem on shrimp, and this is warm water shrimp. It's not necessarily an inventory problem for cold water shrimp, but it's impacting everybody because shrimp is backing up. Those record imports in 2021 and declining sales volumes have led to a buildup in inventory. And so the market is sort of weak going into the summer. And there's a lot of cutback in shrimp pricing, not drastically, not like we have in crab, but it's a weak market. The price is declining slightly. And this is going to cause a cutback in the shrimp farmers are already reacting to these lower prices by reducing the volume of shrimp that they're putting into the ponds. And so when the winter spring crop of farm shrimp from India, et cetera, Indonesia, Vietnam, as that comes into the market, it's going to be smaller than it was in 2022. And that's going to be one of the factors that helps even out this price cycle and correct it a little bit. So we expect falling farm shrimp production. And you can see this really clearly, how cyclical shrimp is. And what I'm saying is we're entering the bottom period of one of these cycles because as the shrimp farmers cut back on production, the supply gets more into balance and prices stabilize. And that's where we are today. Let's look at food service, which is more important for our purposes. Food service has not been experiencing the same decline as retail. The food service usage of shrimp continued to increase in 2022. I think the reason it says 2 years here is this is like December 21 to November 22. It doesn't include the last month. And you can see that the average sales price to restaurants, this is a broad line warehouse distributor price delivered to their customers, has continued to increase as well. And so shrimp is showing a very healthy trend at food service. So restaurants in general have been cutting back from seafood, but shrimp is one of the categories which is still up 1.5%. Nevertheless, this is less than the other categories if you do a comparison. Beef is up 3%, poultry is up 5%. These are menu pricing, sales cost to the restaurants. So shrimp is probably our best performing seafood item at food service right now. And as its overall price declines, it should improve its position this summer. In other words, restaurants are in a position to sell a lot more shrimp, even as retail demand is weakening somewhat. So for cold water shrimp, traditionally, as I've said, these items don't really compete on price. But this year, they're both showing a little bit of a trend in price weakness. I don't see retail sales of cold water shrimp as improving very much this year, but restaurant sales have a better chance because food service operators in general are expecting better conditions. And some of these restaurants, particularly West Coast restaurants, feature a lot of cold water shrimp dishes in shrimp salads and things like that. So here is let's take a look at the West Coast at Oregon for a couple of minutes. Landings in Oregon were continued at a high level. This is in the 40 to 50 million pound level. Catch rates, in other words, how many pounds you bring aboard after an hour's fishing, were extremely, extremely high, almost at record levels. But prices to the vessels were very, very low. If we look at the pricing to the vessel, 46 cents was the lowest price that they'd seen on the West Coast since 2010. Now, the reason for this was that the average size of the shrimp they were landing was very, very small. So the size of the shrimp coming ashore in Oregon was the smallest since 2005, with the mean count being about, this is a whole shrimp, 136 pieces per pound, which translates to a 350, 500 count for Coldwater shrimp once it's cooked and peeled. And so the fact that so much of this shrimp was coming in at that small 350, 500 size, and that is the lowest price Coldwater shrimp on the market, that's what led back to the lower price for vessels on the West Coast. You can see here, this is the count size per pound. So it often goes up and down because one of the reasons for the small size in Oregon was the shrimp were all competing with each other for food. And so this coming year is expected to be a lower catch, but the size of the shrimp should improve a little bit if they have slightly better feeding conditions. And so this small size shrimp from Oregon is likely to reverse to a certain extent. And from a Canadian perspective, this means that once that shrimp season gets going, there's probably going to be more of the larger size Jordani competing with a 250, 350, and a 150, 250 count in the U.S. market. So the U.S. economic forecasts are really all over the map. There's a lot of people that believe there's going to be a recession, but the timing of that keeps getting pushed back. And so there's really no agreement among economists and people who watch this as to whether there's going to be a recession, whether it's going to be a very mild kind of untechnical recession that's not really noticeable in the market, or whether it's going to be something that's really serious. And we just don't know. That's a really big uncertainty facing shrimp markets. That's a big uncertainty facing shrimp markets. And the bank issue is another issue that, sorry, I'm having trouble. The bank issue is another issue that is very unresolved still, even though things have gotten better after a couple of weeks. In 2008, the banks, it took about 8 months between the first cracks and the final resolution. We also don't know if tighter credit is going to cause a deeper recession, and we don't know what this will do to interest rates. So in all this environment, it's much more difficult than usual to say, what is the sales situation going to be like 6 months from now? One of the things that's helpful is currency. The Canadian dollar has weakened about 8% since last spring, and the currency forecast is for relative stability versus the US dollar. So this means that this season, exporters are going to have a slightly more favorable exchange rate, which is always useful. When we look at the economies of these export markets of Europe and China, Europe is doing better than expected. And one of the key reasons is that after the invasion of Ukraine, the oil price spike has really receded. And you can see that the oil prices now are the lowest they've been for a year. And same thing, natural gas prices in Europe. Again, the fear was that there was going to be big shortages and a price spike in natural gas. That's receded as well. And what happened was two things. Winter was warmer than expected, both in Europe and here in North America. And in Europe, they switched industrial production away from some of the most heavy gas-intensive industries and helped conserve gas in that fashion. So the net result has been that after a lot of decline in business sentiment in Europe for a year and a half, the sort of idea sentiment has kind of turned around a little bit. Anything above this green line is saying that conditions are improving. And so they're saying that they are improving for services in Europe, and they are improving overall. And if this doesn't get derailed, it means that European demand for shrimp and coldwater shrimp should be quite positive. China, we're seeing the same thing, better than expected economic recovery. The February data for China was very strong, and there's a lot of increase in output. There's a lot of resolution of logistical and delivery problems, but there's still a little bit of caution on the consumer side because Maersk, the shipping line, which has exposure to the Chinese internal market, is one of those people who is warning that things might not be as good as they look because the Chinese consumers, last time they had sort of a pandemic scare and had to recover in terms of economic activity, they were kind of stunned and they didn't just jump back into spending right away. But nevertheless, China's appetite for shrimp should continue to increase in 2023. As we said, just to summarize here, the shrimp exports declined due to lower production, not changes in the markets. Europe and China potentially have stronger economies than expected. That's very favorable. And the US outlook, I think, is extremely uncertain. So on the positive side, more Canadian coldwater shrimp is going to the US, and the US is producing a good return for producers. Export markets appear to be stable. They're absorbing the shrimp that is available. Currency has been slightly weaker, which means year over year, that's a benefit to exporters. And shrimp is a value at food service, and there's some evidence of good usage of shrimp in restaurants and food service. The negative part is that the overall shrimp market weakness in the warm water sector could spill over and impact coldwater shrimp, which is highly unusual. But the way it would impact them is that restaurants would sort of demand more discounts on all the shrimp that they buy because they're facing headwinds. Oregon shrimp is likely to be larger in size. Remember, that supplies the bulk of the Pandalis market in the US. And with larger sizes, they're more competing directly with Canadian coldwater. And the economic uncertainty in the US is still a huge factor. So I think that's my last slide, and I'm happy to take a few minutes to answer questions before we have to do our next presentation. So thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you, John. So we're now ready for the questions section. We've got, I would say, about 8 minutes. If you have any questions, please write them in the chat. Donc, vous pouvez écrire vos questions dans le chat et on va les traduire pour John. So I don't see any question at this point. Maybe just in the meantime, John, you've noticed or you've mentioned the increase in China for 2022. Do you think that's mostly due to increased production of double frozen cooked and peel, or just increase in domestic consumption?
No. China is not. No. That's not very much cooked and peeled. This was shell-on shrimp.
Yes.
That China was buying, and this is. I know there's a promotion of cooked and peeled shrimp in China, but the main Canadian promotion there, I think, is shell-on, that's been run by Bruce and the Canadian offshore Chapman, the offshore group. They have been very successful in getting shell-on cooked shrimp sold into China, but the cooked and peeled, I think, is a lot smaller part of that market.
Yes, no, but the question was not for the cooked and peeled exported, mostly for the shell-on that goes to China for further processing.
That's a good question. I haven't looked at that. I don't really know. I thought the consumption in the Chinese domestic market was so strong that I did not look at this as a product that's really going to China for further processing. Kind of like lobster. I mean, lobster is not really going to China for further processing. It's all domestic consumption. I think that the shrimp sector is in the same position vis-a-vis China.
Okay.
The hand peeling and stuff is much more
So,
oriented towards Europe, I think.
I don't see any other questions. You also made some comments, I think it was on slide 24, about maybe new markets for cooked and peel. I think you addressed maybe drops in sales to the US. It's possibly due to maybe an increasing demand domestically here in Canada for cooked and peel shrimp. So that's something that could be an explanation. I think it was.
Yeah, actually, there is the Canadian domestic markets on some of these products are very strong, and if there's a stronger demand in Canada, it's going to leave less for export value. I mean, we're used to, looking at Canadian producers as being strongly export oriented, but you're right that for some of these products, the domestic market is very important.
I don't see any question, but if you do have question, you can also send them by email. I'll write my email address in the chat, and we can share these questions to John later in the week.
Perfect. Thank you, Maxime.
No problem.
So we have 5 minutes left. I think John would appreciate just a little break before the next presentation.
I think I'll do that, and we'll be back. I'll be back at 10. So, at 11.
Perfect. So we'll start in 5 minutes. So it's the same link for anybody that wants to stay on. Please stay on for the next session. If you're not interested in the oyster session, then you can leave the session. Thank you.